Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savvy. Back for another season and back with some fantastic guests. And we've had our guest on before. It is Jo Sidhu. He's a QC. And I've got to get this right. You are also the president of the Society of Asian Lawyers.
I am, and it's great to be back, Savvy.
Good to see you. This time around we're going to do a special. We're not necessarily going to cover the news off, but one of the biggest items in the news recently, within the last 10 days or so, was the tragedy over in Paris, where there were terrorists. They were bombing a particular newspaper outlet. They felt they were being offended, or they were just fighting for their cause, whatever that cause is. Personally, my view on people that fight and do that kind of terrorist activities, they really need to come out in the open and talk about their issues and their problems rather than killing people. It is not a good way to behave, and it causes all kinds of ripple effects further down into society, as well as the reputation of their particular society. So I wanted to talk about the fact that a lot of people are talking about freedom of expression. I want to dedicate this program to try and understand what is the difference between the freedom of expression that people get going on about. They've got these little placards, haven't they, you know, saying Je suis Charlie, you know, if you get it right. It's got an interesting article on the internet if you look at it, and somebody spelt it wrong, which is quite bad. It's got known as hashtagging incorrectly. But in Twitter, it's been tweeted something like 5.3 million times over. The person who created the little poster, which is the white writing with a black background, is a little bit worried about the fact that it may be used for other campaigns. But specifically, let's talk about, for the next 20 minutes or so, there is freedom of expression, but does that give the right of people to actually offend other people? And I note, and just before we get going, in Question Time recently, their publication guidelines in terms of the content that they publish online says that there is a respect factor here, the respect of the fundamental human right to exercise freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and this includes an individual's freedom to worship, teach, practice and observe. But they are respectful. Nobody goes out of their way to incite hatred or violence on other people by actually drawing images. But I just kind of find that no one's talking about blasphemy and, you know, the fact that you've got to respect other people. But isn't there a difference between that? Between freedom of expression and the freedom to insult someone?
I think that most people who believe very strongly in the importance of freedom of expression as one of the building blocks of our modern society also feel that freedom of expression sometimes means that you will say things that other people will not like. I think, Savi, freedom of expression is a right which has been fought for over many centuries in this country and in Europe and in other countries as well. Our own experience in India was that the birth of the Sikh religion took place in the context of resistance against tyranny and the desire to be able to express the formation of a new religion without being snuffed out by a ruling power. And that was a form of freedom of expression.
But I think also, we will talk about it later in a bit, but, you know, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. Sikhi-wise, you know, and we did touch on this when we were having a discussion earlier on, we won't labour it too much now, but I would say that Sikhi does do one thing, it does defend the defenceless, right? It has done a lot to fight for the freedom of other religions as well. Not necessarily exclusively, but I think if you look in history, you won't find that many people who would give up their families, give up their sons, give up their own lives for the freedom of others. But I'll let you carry on.
I mean, so there's no doubt that the record of Sikhism as a religion which was born in the fire of oppression is that its leaders and its followers have always valued the importance not just of protecting their own right to practice their religion, but the right of others as well. But what that means, however, is that when you uphold the right to have freedom of expression, you have to recognize that sometimes other people will use that same freedom to hurt your feelings. And you have to accept that it is part of the agreement, the contract that you enter into when you think that freedom of expression is really important. Let me give you a simple example. We talk these days about the value of democracy and spreading democracy throughout the globe. But democracy essentially means accepting sometimes that you are a loser, engaging in a political process, voting for the party that you favor, but finding that another party actually becomes the winning party, and sucking that up and accepting it, because that's part of the deal that you make when you support democracy. Equally, for the same reason, if you believe genuinely that you have the right to express yourself freely, then so do other people. And sometimes that may mean that you find yourself feeling hurt or offended. But
So
it's such an important right.
In France, you can't go to school if you wear a turban. So, you know, I don't have the freedom to express that I'm a Sikh in France, but
France has taken...
France has taken the freedom to express horrible, rude cartoons.
France has taken a very,
abolition.
very strong line because it is an expressly secular society, which after the revolution got rid of so many of the vestiges of what France used to be, run by a royal family, run by the Catholic Church. Liberty, egalitarianism and fraternity were the call of the French revolutionaries. So for them, it's really important to put religion, as they see it, in its place, which is not in the center part of French society, but out on the periphery. And the result of that has been that the French have come to some very odd results. They've decided, for example, that you cannot enter or participate in public life, whether it's in the health service or education or in the police service, if you are wearing a veil or a burqa. You can't do so if you're wearing a turban or if you're wearing a big crucifix as a Christian.
They're all very different things, and they all mean different things.
I personally find that very perverse, because at the end of the day, if they genuinely believe in freedom of expression, they must allow people to express their religion as well within the confines of their society, not at the expense of other people's rights, but they should allow Sikhs to wear their turbans and others to practice their religious beliefs. Having said that, I also think that in this country, there has come a time now that people feel that it's important for those who have a secular outlook to reassert their position within society, because a lot of British people at the moment have the sense that their country is being taken over by religious extremism, and not just Islamic extremism. There's all sorts of other extremism which is probably more suppressed than it is obvious. There are many faiths, whether it's the Hindu, Christian, Sikh, Jewish faith, where if you put a camera in someone's living room and you listen to the sort of private conversations that people have amongst their family, you'd be shocked to hear the things that people say, but they'd never say in public.
Yeah, but in this case we're talking about a newspaper, which is goes to whatever the 60,000 kind of circulation list is.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, just after the tragedies in France, we saw the fact that more posters or more cartoons were being published to 1 million publication in terms of totals, and probably more outlets as well compared to where they are now. To prove a point, or to be more provocative? I mean, I'll come back to the definitions. Let's see, another definition here. Wikipedia suggests that blasphemy law is a law limiting the freedom of speech and expression relating to blasphemy or irreverence towards holy personages, religious artifacts, customs or belief. So there has been a case in the past where we're talking about 1600 where somebody was actually found guilty and actually was
the laws moved
killed.
Laws moved on a long way.
Law has moved on, absolutely, yeah.
The law now, so far as incitement to religious hatred is concerned, is enshrined in the Racial and Religious Hatred Act of 2006. Now, you may well know that there was a prohibition, and it goes back a long ways, back to 1986, under the Public Order Act, on people using racially offensive words or behavior that could make people of a racial minority feel that they are being picked on.
So that was 1986, was it?
Now, back in 1986, the law was enshrined in the Public Order Act, which made it an offence for people to use abusive, insulting or threatening words.
Would that have been a cartoon? Would that have been insulting?
If it was racial. So if, for example, taking what happened in France, if there was a magazine in this country that drew a black man as an ape, that would be undoubtedly racially insulting, and it wouldn't be allowed in law, and the people who produced that magazine would be on the end of a prosecution and find themselves convicted, undoubtedly.
So trying to
but there's this point, there's a difference.
Okay.
Now, the law, so far as the Racial and Religious Hatred Act, is different to this extent, that the courts in this country do not regard insulting or abusing someone's religion as a criminal offence. If you threaten someone's religion by saying, I'm going to firebomb a gurdwara or a mosque, or I'm going to kill an imam or a Sikh priest, that is a different offence, but not if you simply abuse or insult them. So the law has taken the view that it is unacceptable to abuse or insult someone on the basis of their racial identity, but it is acceptable to abuse or insult someone on the basis of their religious identity. There is a distinction drawn between religion and race. And within the European Convention of Human Rights, which is part of our law and has been since the Human Rights Act of 1998, it is in fact expressly allowed for you to give your views in public, freedom of expression, under Article 10, even if that means that you might be offending people when you're doing so. Equally, you're allowed to express your religion and your thoughts and your conscience as enshrined by Article 9. So what we have in our law in this country are different acts covering different types of behavior, but the bottom line is this. In England, we allow people to use offensive language about other people's religion, but we don't allow them to do it when it comes to the other people's race.
So whatever happened to, we all got brains tonight, you know, when we're born, you know, sense and sensibility. Whatever happened to the fact that mutual respect comes from understanding that we're all different, but effectively we're all the same. You know, if I cut you or cut me and we look at the blood, it's still the same colour, right? So, you know,
Shylock's speech in The Merchant of Venice. So,
absolutely. So, ultimately, sense and sensibility should prevail, shouldn't it? And then should there not be something that looks at the governance of and I'm not saying it's a way of policing these individuals, but the editors, you know, to prove a point, they're being provocative.
Most editors, most news outlets, most media operators operate a system of self-censorship, generally speaking. Generally speaking, they don't make gratuitous remarks, even though the law allows them to. Generally speaking, they don't go out their way to be offensive towards religious people, even though the law allows them to. In the media, there is self-censorship. Amongst commentators and pundits, less so. What I find, if you put "Have I Got News for You" on, you'll find that they'll be quite happy to insult someone's religion. Absolutely. And they do it quite deliberately. Yep. And I think a lot of people within our society test the boundaries by continually pushing and saying, what if I said this about your religion? Is that allowed by the law? And generally speaking, you will find, Savi, that the law is very accommodating to those people. And the reason is very simple. This country only has its freedoms because people were prepared to test the status quo. The reason why we have votes for women is because women went on the street and said, we are going to express ourselves now and chain ourselves to fences and walls and what have you, throw ourselves in front of horses in order to get votes for women.
I think, are we not getting, maybe I'm getting confused here, but is there not a distinction between human rights, okay, civil rights, you know, and making sure that, like I said before, about, you know, we're all equal, aren't we? You know, it doesn't matter whether you're black, green, yellow, or whatever. We're all equal. Yeah. So suddenly now we're thinking about the fact that we're thinking about race, we're not thinking about religion. But some people, religion's very, very important. You know, it's their way of life. It's what they fundamentally believe in terms of driving them forward. It gives them their values that they need. It gives them the fact that they can, like, interestingly, all religions believe in peace. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so it gives them that fuel to motivate their daily lives to do good for others. I'm being idealistic here, right? Course, yeah. I'm not talking about the minority that spoil it for the majority, who will cause wars between, because they say the religion can cause wars, right? I always think it's probably the minority within that are trying to exploit it. If Muslims are professing that they are a religion of peace, which is what all their imams and people say, then it might be the minority within that community that are saying this is, you know, they believe in jihad or whatever it is they believe in. My point was that doesn't this create ripple effects? Are we not in a situation where, to prove a point, people are being rude, they are being insulting to their religion, and just because the law says you can't doesn't mean you should, right? Absolutely. I mean, the law is permissive. It allows you to do things, doesn't mean you actually have to exercise that right, which is why we have two things going on. One is, as I've said, those who have power within the media exercising some degree of self-censorship, and you'll see that all the time. I mean, the BBC don't gratuitously, generally speaking, go out of their way to insult people because of their religion, even though the law permits them to. And the other thing is that we socialize people from a very early age these days in schools to respect other people's religions. Right. So when we teach children about religious education, the differences within our multicultural society, generally speaking, we are encouraging them to be tolerant and accepting of other people's faiths. let's carry on and let's talk about a movie in Bollywood. Apparently it has become a all-time box office success. The figures from the 7th of January say it's breached the $90 million worldwide mark, making it the highest grossing Bollywood film ever. Now, The Guardian suggests that if aliens were to land in India today, they would be greeted by a bewildering spectacle, while hordes of makers and people who are film buffs gather outside the cinemas to see the film. There'll be a bunch of people also outside with saffron flags saying it's an insult to their particular religion.
Yeah.
Now, I've actually seen the film. I know you haven't seen the film.
I haven't seen it, no.
And one of the things it does do is it does talk about, false teachers and people who ask you to do certain things in a certain way because you'll get salvation, and it looks inappropriate. Again, it's a kind of a satirical kind of view of it in terms of religion. And there is one scene where he will go in, this is the actual main character who's an alien, and he'll go into a place where all the children are, they've just been born, in one of those wards, and he keeps picking up each child, trying to see if there's a barcode on the back of the child to tell people what religion that particular person's from. I was actually thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking that kind of whatever religion you're born into, it's obviously your parents will nurture you, and you might find out more about it, and hopefully you'll follow it and respect it. But that's kind of you've been put in that position. We don't choose before we arrive in this earth where we're going to be or what position we're going to be in. We need to be grateful. My personal ambition in life is always to try and do things for other people, if that's something you can do, and try your best to.
Which is more a value than it is a religion. It happens to be that most religions will say that helping your fellow man and woman is something which you ought to do as a good human being. And no particular religion has a monopoly on that. We happen to be from a Sikh background, so we have certain values enshrined in us. But I think, actually, Sabi, I'm glad I don't live in India. I'm glad that our parents came here. I'm glad that we settled here and that we enjoy all the freedoms that we have here without the fear that a mob is going to come to our door because, for example, I am a political leader, or I am a film artist, or I am someone who makes fun of the state, makes fun of religion, makes fun of all the pundits and all the imams and all the priests who go on about how pious they are, but in fact are leading deeply hypocritical lives. I think it's important for artists and for social critics to expose hypocrisy when they see it. And one of the reasons why I think this whole discussion about what's been going on in France and spilling over into England is so important is because it is a timely reminder to all of us about how important it is that we are able to say what we think about other people, their religions, and the values that they uphold. And to say that without fear of being murdered or attacked or have our house burnt down or to be vilified in a way which is simply retaliation rather than engagement in discussion. We live in a relatively free society. Sikhs as a religious group have fought long and hard for the right to exist as a religion. And they did so in the face of tyranny. They did so because they were being snuffed out by people who said, we won't tolerate your new religion because it is a threat to our religion.
Well, there was also a campaign...
But that's freedom of speech.
There was also a campaign of ethnic cleansing going on at the time as well. And we don't, where we talk about, a lot of the rubbish that goes on with regards to ISIS, there's kind of barbaric behaviour. We have a return to barbaric behaviour, which is killing people and putting their heads on sticks, beheading them, but believing that their religion is the only religion that takes you to salvation.
Every religion, almost every religion, either I don't know Buddhists who, generally speaking, shout from the rooftops about how great their religion is and everyone should convert to Buddhism, but generally speaking, every religion or major religions of the world profess that they are the best religion. People are members of a religion because they're born into it or they convert to it. But whichever way you look at it, if you remain part of a religion or you embrace a religion, it's because you take the view that that is a better religion than the next one, and it's better than no religion. So let's look at the situation internationally. The Muslim religion has undergone some huge convulsions because there is, in the last 10-15 years, a strain within Islam which is pushing it to extremes. The vast majority of Muslims who live here and worldwide don't want to be any part of that.
Let us not also forget that the guy who, and you reminded me of this earlier on when we were talking off air, one of the individuals was a Muslim guy that was in the Jewish bakery.
Yes, who protected the lives of Jewish people in that bakery. Now, the Jewish religion has got its own case to answer. The behavior of the Israeli government in Gaza has raised huge outcries and opposition and disgust amongst the world's public. And if you speak to Jewish people, they'll say to you, we are the chosen people. That's what they believe. Muslims believe that they are the chosen people. Christians believe that they are the chosen people. So just below the surface of all religions is a lingering arrogance that they are, in fact, the most important religion in the world. The Sikh religion, generally speaking, has been a deeply liberal religion. It doesn't go out of its way, for example, to convert people. So it's not a proselytizing religion as we describe it, to convert people over to the Sikh religion. It's very much live and let live. But even within the Sikh religion, as we know, Sabi, there has been strains of extremism, and we need to be very sensitive to that.
Well, I think there's also, there are you know, sometimes if you're a minority in a country, and I'm not saying this to defend any particular activity or behaviour, but sometimes when you are a minority in a country, you are at the mercy of that particular country or whatever.
I don't think that's true of Sikhs.
We've had that situation in the past where, you know, Sikhs have been misconstrued, right? And
but no, I think that's a misrepresentation. I think if you think about Sikhs being in this country since the 50s, particularly 60s...
Yeah, I didn't mean minority here, I meant minority in India, actually.
Well, as a minority in India, generally speaking, over the last 300 or 400 years, Sikhs, until they were finding themselves in 1947 in particular being treated very badly.
And that's what's happened. I mean, I think this is a separate subject.
And then subsequently, you know, in the 80s, the general experience of Sikhs within the Indian nation is that they have participated and integrated way beyond their numbers would suggest.
Yeah.
And although there are major issues still to be resolved, human rights issues, what happened in the Delhi riots, what happens on other occasions as well with Operation Blue Star. There's lots of outstanding issues to be resolved, and there are human rights questions that need to be answered. But my experience has been, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, my extended family in Punjab, is that they have got on with their lives and they haven't been restricted in getting on with their lives as Sikhs and become very successful people. In this country, ditto. They've been, again, very successful as a community.
And they've done well for society.
But the reason why that is, and the reason why we need to be guardians of the right of people to be able to express themselves freely, even when it offends us, is because we, as Sikh people, have benefited from that right when it was hard won by our own gurus to make sure that they guaranteed the future existence of a religion like Sikhism.
But also the freedom of others to practice what they want to practice
their religions as well. So I think we have...
I think what we have done, we're literally out of time. I could talk to you for another hour or half hour on this subject, or even more, is to say, well, you know, thanks very much for coming today. There are a number of areas that we've covered. You've been very good on helping us understand where the law actually sits. It was very useful to understand about what the difference was in 1986 to 2006 and how, you know, it's like anything that kind of changes and morphs as it goes forward. Not necessarily sure if it's for the better. I think there are still grey areas. I think you will secretly agree that there are some grey areas between behaviour, ripple effects, the responsibility of sense and sensibility. And you mentioned, you know, self-regulating to make sure that you're not being insulting. But then again, you know, people may argue that freedom of expression is their own freedom to express the way that they want to express it, whether it be a cartoon or a bit of text. I would say that they have to exercise caution. That's my personal opinion. It's not yours. But I think,
no, I do. I think they should exercise caution. But I think that you cannot legislate to muzzle people, to stop them from saying what they like.
Yeah, but we're not muzzling. We're saying be sensible. Muzzling would be put a tape around them and not say anything. So that's it for this time round. Thanks very much for tuning in. I really appreciate Jo coming on the show and giving us all that great expertise. We hope to have you back soon, maybe on a regular show, which will talk about art news in general across the world. So I hope you enjoyed us. If you want to contact us, you can do that channel by sending an email. You can pick up the hashtag on MediaWatch, hashtag MediaWatch on Twitter, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.